She mocked me in front of everyone, saying, "She is just admin." Then her fiancé turned and asked, "So, what do you actually do?" I answered with one word. The room went silent. Her parents turned pale. And then, in that moment, she knew exactly who I am. This happened at the end, when the string lights were humming against the dark, and the champagne had gone warm in the glass. But the unraveling started much earlier. It started at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, under a sun that felt heavy enough to press the breath out of my lungs. I arrived at my parents' house before the caterers had finished setting up. This was my role. It had been my role for 30 years. I was the reliable one, the quiet one. The one who existed in the negative space left behind by my sister, Evelyn. The backyard had been transformed into something that looked less like a family home and more like a stage set for a perfume commercial. Hundreds of white lilies choked the air with a scent that was too sweet, bordering on cloying. Silk ribbons fluttered from the oak trees, and a banner with the names Evelyn and Daniel stretched high above the patio, snapping softly in the breeze. I had not even made it to the back door when the screen slid open. My mother stepped out. She looked frantic, her hair sprayed into a helmet of perfection that dared the wind to move a single strand. She did not say hello. She did not ask how I was. She did not ask about the 3-hour drive I had just made from the city. "Here, take these," she said, thrusting a stack of cocktail napkins into my chest. "The bar area is a mess. The ice needs to be broken up, and someone needs to make sure the lemons are sliced thin. Not wedges, Holly. Thin wheels." Evelyn was very specific about the wheels. I took the napkins. My fingers brushed against hers, but she was already turning away, her eyes scanning the horizon for the only daughter she actually saw. "I will handle it," I said. "Good," she threw over her shoulder. "Stay out of the way once the guests start arriving. We want this to be perfect." I walked to the makeshift bar set up on the patio stones. It was funny, in a way that offered no amusement whatsoever. 6 hours ago, I had been sitting in a high-backed leather chair in courtroom 4, holding a man's freedom in my hands. I had signed 3 warrants. I had reviewed a motion to dismiss on a corporate merger, worth $400 million. When I spoke in that room, stenographers typed every syllable. When I entered, a bailiff shouted for the room to rise. But here, in the shadow of my childhood home, I was just Holly. The help. The background noise. I picked up a paring knife and started slicing lemons. The acidity stung a paper cut on my thumb, a small, sharp reminder that I was real, even if no one here seemed to notice. I told myself it was fine. I told myself this was the price of peace. For years, I had learned that my accomplishments were viewed as direct attacks on Evelyn. If I got an A, she threw a tantrum until she got a toy. If I got a promotion, she developed a sudden, mysterious illness that required all of my parents' attention. So I learned to edit myself. I learned to shrink. I became a master of making myself small so she could feel big. I told them I worked at the courthouse. It was not a lie. I did work there. I just let them fill in the blanks with their own low expectations. They assumed I filed paperwork or answered phones, and I never corrected them. It was easier to be disappointing than to be threatening. The sound of a car door slamming shattered the afternoon quiet. Then came the voices. High, excited, demanding. Evelyn had arrived. I wiped my hands on a towel and stepped back into the shade of the awning. She swept into the backyard, like she was making an entrance at the Met Gala. She wore a white dress that probably cost more than my first car. And on her finger sat a diamond so large it caught the sunlight and threw fractured rainbows across the lawn. She looked beautiful. She also looked terrifying. This was her day, her stage, and we were all just props to be moved around until the lighting was right. Behind her walked Daniel. I had only met him twice, briefly. He was tall, with the kind of polished, easy confidence that comes from old money and a good education, He was carrying 3 gift bags and Evelyn's purse, looking less like a fiancé and more like a high-end assistant. But there was something sharp in his eyes as he scanned the yard. A keen intelligence that did not quite match the vapid energy of the party planning. My parents rushed to them. My father, who had barely looked up from his newspaper when I walked in, was suddenly beaming, his posture straightening. My mother was already fluttering around Evelyn, fixing a stray lock of hair, cooing over the dress. "Perfect," my mother said. "You look absolutely perfect." Evelyn soaked it in, her smile tight and practiced. She looked around the yard, her gaze sliding over the flowers, the table settings, and finally landing on the bar. Her eyes skipped over me as if I were part of the furniture, just another fixture indistinguishable from the ice bucket and the stack of napkins. "Is everything ready?" Evelyn asked, her voice carrying that edge of panic she always masked as authority. "Yes, of course," my mother said, steering her toward the seating area. "Holly is handling the drink setup." Evelyn paused. She glanced back toward the bar, finally acknowledging my presence with a microscopic nod. "Oh, good," she said. "At least she can handle that. Just make sure she does not try to mix anything complicated. Keep it to wine and beer, okay? We do not need a disaster." I kept slicing the lemons. I did not look up. I did not throw the knife. I focused on the rhythm of the blade against the cutting board. Chop, chop, slide. A distant aunt, someone I had not seen since Christmas 3 years ago, leaned in toward my mother. I could hear them clearly over the light jazz starting to play from the speakers. "Is that Holly?" the aunt asked. "She looks tired. What is she doing with herself these days?" My mother laughed, a light, dismissive sound that hurt more than a slap. "Oh, you know Holly," she said. "She is still at the courthouse downtown. Just admin work. Filing, typing, answering the phones. It keeps her busy." "That is nice," the aunt said, losing interest immediately. "It is good to have a steady job. Not everyone can be a superstar like Evelyn." "No," my mother agreed, her voice swelling with pride. "Evelyn is one of a kind." I placed the last lemon wheel into the glass bowl. The acid was really burning my thumb now, a throbbing pulse of pain that traveled up my wrist. I looked at the white flowers. I looked at the banner with their names. I looked at Daniel, who was standing near the patio door, watching the exchange with a furrowed brow. He was not looking at Evelyn. He was looking at me. I looked away. I was good at this. I was the invisible servant. I would serve the drinks. I would smile when spoken to. I would leave early before anyone realized I was gone. That was the plan. That was always the plan. But as I wiped down the counter, staring at the reflection of a woman who had sentenced a cartel boss to life in prison without parole, I felt a crack in the foundation. It was a small hairline fracture in the wall I had built to protect them from the truth. I did not know it yet, but the wall was about to come down. And it was going to make a hell of a lot of noise when it fell. By 6:30, the sun had begun its slow descent behind the oak trees, casting long, bruised shadows of purple and orange across the lawn. The air turned cooler, but the noise of the party had only grown louder, swelling into a cacophony of clinking glass and performative laughter. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, collecting empty champagne flutes and replacing wet napkins, weaving between clusters of people who looked right through me. It was a skill I had perfected over decades. If you move with enough purpose and keep your eyes lowered, people assume you are part of the machinery, not part of the social circle. I was safe in the periphery. Or at least, I thought I was. Evelyn was holding court near the patio steps, one hand resting possessively on Daniel's arm, the other gesturing wildly as she recounted a story that I knew for a fact was 60% embellishment. She spotted me passing by with a tray of dirty glasses and stopped mid-sentence. "Oh, there she is," Evelyn announced, her voice pitching up an octave. "Daniel, come here. You have barely said 2 words to my sister." I froze. My instinct was to keep walking, to pretend I had not heard. But that would only cause a scene. I turned, forcing a polite, tight-lipped smile onto my face. They approached me, a study in contrast. Evelyn was vibrating with manic energy, desperate to be the center of gravity, while Daniel moved with a slow, deliberate calmness. I do not think everyone has properly met, Evelyn said, draping an arm around my shoulders. The weight of it felt heavy, like a yoke. This is Holly. She works at the courthouse downtown. Daniel extended his hand. Hello, Holly. It is good to finally speak with you. I shifted the tray to my left hand and took his right. I intended to give him the limp, non-threatening shake expected of a shy administrative assistant. But habit is a dangerous thing. My muscle memory betrayed me. I gripped his hand firmly, meeting his eyes with the steady, unblinking contact I used when swearing in a witness. It was a handshake of equals, of authority. Daniel stopped. He did not pull away immediately. His eyes narrowed slightly, searching my face. He felt the calluses on my fingers from gripping a pen for 12 hours a day, the rigidity of my posture. For a second, the polite mask slipped, and I saw a flicker of genuine confusion. Nice to meet you, I said, softening my voice, trying to pull my hand back. The pleasure is mine, he said slowly, releasing me. Evelyn says you keep the place running. Organizing files, scheduling. Something like that, Evelyn interrupted, laughing. She is the queen of the filing cabinet. Honestly, I do not know how she handles the boredom. I would go crazy sitting in a cubicle all day. I felt the heat rise in my neck. I did not sit in a cubicle. I sat on a raised dais of mahogany, flanked by the state flag and the national seal. It pays the bills, I murmured, looking down at the grass. Suddenly, a loud crash shattered the conversation. 3 feet away, a waiter had collided with a guest, sending a tray of red wine tumbling onto the pristine limestone pavers. The sound of breaking glass was followed immediately by gasps and a chaotic shuffle of feet. The guest, a woman in a pale silk dress, shrieked and jumped back. "Oh my God, my dress!" she screamed. The waiter, a young kid who looked no older than 19, froze in panic. He started to bend down, reaching for the jagged shards with his bare hands. "Stop," I said. The word came out before I could check it. It was not a suggestion. It was a command. It was the voice I used to silence a rowdy gallery. It was sharp, resonant, and absolute. The waiter froze instantly, his hand hovering inches from the glass. The woman stopped screaming. For a heartbeat, the circle of people around us went dead silent. Turning to look at the source of the order, I realized what I had done. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had broken character. I blinked, forcing my shoulders to slump, forcing the authority to drain out of my stance. I stammered, pitching my voice higher, softer. "You might cut yourself, let me get a broom. It is dangerous." The spell broke. The chatter resumed, though a few people cast curious glances in my direction. I rushed to the service station, grabbed a towel and a dustpan, and knelt on the stones, cleaning up the mess. I let the menial nature of the task wash over me, hiding my face, praying that the moment would be forgotten. When I stood up, holding the debris, I found Daniel waiting for me by the edge of the drink station. Evelyn had moved on to console the woman with the stained dress. But Daniel had stayed behind. He was watching me with a look I could not decipher. It was not pity. It was the look of a man trying to solve a puzzle that had missing pieces. "You handled that quickly," he said. His voice was low, meant only for me. I shrugged, dumping the glass into a bin. "I am used to cleaning up messes." "Is that so?" he asked. He leaned against the high-top table, sipping his scotch. "You know, I spend a lot of time at the courthouse. I am surprised I have never run into you in the clerk's office." "Which division are you in?" "Civil," I lied. Or half-lied. "My courtroom heard civil cases." "Civil," he repeated. "That must be chaotic right now. With the Sterling merger and the antitrust filings, the paperwork must be endless." He was testing me. I knew it instantly. The Sterling merger was the biggest case in the state. The files were sealed. The docket was a nightmare. An admin would know about the stress, the overtime, the sheer volume of paper. They would not know the details. It is busy, I said carefully, wiping down the counter. Lots of boxes. He tilted his head. Just boxes. I heard Judge Miller denied the motion to dismiss last week. That must have caused a panic in the filing room. My stomach twisted. He was talking about me. He was talking about my ruling. I had spent 4 nights agonizing over that decision, writing the opinion in the quiet hours of the morning. I kept my eyes on the napkin I was folding. I think there was some rushing around, I said, keeping my words vague. But the judge is particular. She likes things done a certain way. Particular, Daniel echoed. That is one word for it. I heard she is brilliant. Terrifying, but brilliant. I felt a flush of pride I could not suppress, followed immediately by a wave of nausea. He was talking about me with admiration, while looking at me like I was a servant. The dissonance was making me dizzy. She just follows the law, I said softly. Daniel did not respond immediately. He took another sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving my face. He looked like he wanted to ask another question, something that would cut right through the flimsy barrier I had erected. Before he could speak, a bell chimed from the patio. Dinner is served, my mother called out, her voice bright and artificial. Everyone, please find your seats. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. Excuse me, I said to Daniel. I need to help with the service. I turned and walked away, my heels sinking slightly into the soft earth. I could feel his gaze on my back, heavy and warm. He knew. He did not know what he knew, but he knew something was wrong. The play was falling apart, and we had not even made it to the second act. I took my seat, at the far end of the long table, as far away from the center as possible, and prayed that the night would end before the truth caught up to me. The dinner table was a long, mahogany expanse that stretched beneath a canopy of string lights, glowing like captured fireflies against the dark sky. 30 guests were seated along its length, a curated collection of family friends, distant relatives, and Daniel's business associates. The seating chart, handwritten in calligraphy on thick cream cardstock, told a story all its own. Evelyn and Daniel sat at the center, the nucleus of the atom. My parents flanked them, beaming like they had personally invented the concept of marriage. Then came the important guests, the partners from Daniel's firm, the wealthy neighbors, the people who could offer favors or prestige. As the line extended outward, the importance faded, until you reached the very edge of the table, near the swinging kitchen doors. That was where I sat. My chair was slightly wobbly, one leg shorter than the others, either forcing me to keep my weight balanced on the left side to avoid rocking. Every time the kitchen door swung open, a draft of hot air and the smell of dish soap washed over me. It was the seat reserved for the socially irrelevant, the place you put the person you expect to listen, but never to speak. The waiter I had helped earlier moved past me, placing a plate of seared scallops in front of me. He caught my eye for a second, a flicker of recognition and confusion, before moving on. I picked up my fork. The metal was cool and heavy. I focused on the weight of it, grounding myself in the physical reality of the moment, because the emotional reality was becoming harder to endure. Halfway through the main course, the clinking of a spoon against crystal cut through the low hum of conversation. Evelyn stood up. She held her champagne flute high, the bubbles catching the light. She looked radiant. I had to give her that. She possessed a magnetic quality that drew every eye in the room, a practiced charisma that made you want to be noticed by her, even if you knew she would forget you 5 minutes later. I just want to say a few words, Evelyn began, her voice carrying easily without a microphone. The table went quiet. My father leaned back, a satisfied smile plastered on his face. Daniel stayed seated, looking up at her with a polite, attentive expression, though I noticed he had barely touched his wine. "Tonight is about love, obviously," Evelyn said, flashing a smile at Daniel. "But it is also about partnership." When I look at Daniel, I do not just see a fiancé. I see a powerhouse. I see someone who argues complex cases in front of the toughest judges in the state and wins. I see ambition. There was a murmur of agreement around the table. Someone shouted, "Here, here." Evelyn beamed. "We are a team." Two people who understand that if you want something in this world, you have to go out and take it. You have to command the room. You have to be the person everyone is watching. She paused for effect, taking a sip of her champagne. Then, her gaze drifted down the table. It bypassed the lawyers and the neighbors. It skipped over our parents. It landed, with laser precision, on me. "And then, there are those who support us," she said, her tone shifting. It was supposed to sound benevolent, but the undercurrent was sharp enough to draw blood. "My sister, Holly, for example." Every head turned. 30 pairs of eyes shifted to the end of the table. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, a familiar, suffocating burn. I kept my face neutral. I did not smile. I did not frown. I just sat there, balancing on my wobbly chair. "Holly is the backbone of the courthouse," Evelyn continued, a light laugh bubbling up in her throat. "While Daniel is out there changing the legal landscape, Holly is making sure the files are in alphabetical order. She is the one keeping the seat warm, answering the phones. You know, the vital work." A few people chuckled. It was a polite, reflex sound. The kind of laughter that fills the space when someone with money makes a bad joke. "Right, Holly?" Evelyn asked, tilting her head. I tightened my grip on the fork. The tines pressed into the pad of my thumb. "Right," I said quietly. Evelyn turned back to the crowd, emboldened by the laughter. "Honestly, it is perfect for her," she said, leaning in as if sharing a secret with the room. "Holly has always been the quiet one. Do you remember, Mom? That time in high school when Holly tried to run for student council treasurer?" My stomach dropped. I knew where this was going. "She panicked during the speech," Evelyn said, gesturing widely. "Just froze. Totally silent for 2 minutes. I had to go up on stage and finish it for her." That was a lie. I had not panicked. The microphone had cut out, and Evelyn had jumped on stage to steal the moment, before the technician could fix it. But that was the version of history she had told for 15 years, and it was the version my parents believed. "And it is the same now," Evelyn said, waving a hand toward me. "She is happy in the background. Last week, she was telling me about a coffee run she did for the judges. Apparently, she got the orders wrong and had to go back 3 times. Can you imagine? The air left my lungs. I had never told her that. I had never gone on a coffee run. I had never messed up an order. She was inventing failures now, drafting fiction in real time to make herself feel taller by standing on my neck. The table laughed louder this time. My mother was shaking her head, smiling an apology to the guest next to her. "Oh, poor Holly," she mouthed. "She tries." I looked down at my plate. The scallops had gone cold. The wood of the table beneath my free hand felt solid, real, anchoring me to the earth, while my sister spun a web of humiliation around me. I could feel the injustice of it vibrating in my chest. A physical pressure that wanted to explode. It was not just the mockery. It was the erasure. She was taking my life, my hard work, my sleepless nights writing opinions that shaped the law, and reducing them to a clumsy anecdote about latte orders. I took a slow breath. I told myself to let it go. I told myself it did not matter. But then, I looked up. I looked past Evelyn, past my parents, and locked eyes with Daniel. He was not laughing. He was sitting perfectly still, his hands resting on the table. His fork was suspended halfway to his plate. And he was looking at Evelyn with an expression of profound disturbance. It was the look of a man who had opened a door expecting a garden, and found a landfill. He looked at Evelyn, who was basking in the attention, and then he looked back at me. He looked at my hands, white-knuckled around the silverware. He looked at my jaw, set tight to keep the words inside. And in his eyes, I saw the pieces finally click together. The intelligence I had seen earlier sharpened into a point. He realized the discrepancy. He realized that the woman Evelyn was describing, the clumsy, shy, incompetent admin, was not the woman sitting at the end of the table. He set his fork down. It was a small sound, a soft clatter of silver against china, but in the break of the laughter, it sounded like a gunshot. Daniel pushed his chair back slightly. The movement drew Evelyn's attention. She looked down at him, her smile faltering for the first time. "Daniel," she asked. He did not answer her. He turned in his seat, ignoring the 30 guests, ignoring his fiancée, ignoring the social script that demanded he smile and nod. He turned his body fully toward the end of the table, toward the kitchen doors, toward me. "Wait," he said. The single word hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. The laughter died instantly. The silence that followed was not the comfortable silence of a pause. It was the suffocating silence of a wire pulled tight, ready to snap. He stared at me, and for the first time all night, I did not look away. I did not shrink. I met his gaze, and I waited for the question I knew was coming. The question that would burn the whole stage down. Wait. The word did not just interrupt the dinner. It severed the air in the garden like a guillotine blade. The chatter at the far end of the table died out in a ripple effect. Silence traveling from the center outward until the only sound remaining was the rhythmic chirping of crickets in the hedges and the distant hum of the refrigerator compressor from the house. Evelyn's smile froze. It did not drop, but it lost its elasticity, becoming a rigid, brittle thing. She blinked, looking down at Daniel as if he had just spoken in a foreign language. "Excuse me," she laughed, though the sound was thin. Daniel did not look at her. He shifted his entire body, the wooden legs of his chair scraping harshly against the stone patio. He turned his back on the fiancé he was supposed to be celebrating, on the parents who were watching with bated breath, and on the guests who were leaning in with hungry curiosity. He looked only at me. "You do not talk like an admin, Holly," he said. His voice was calm, conversational, but it carried a weight that pressed down on the table. "And you certainly do not listen like one." I felt the blood drain from my face, not out of fear, but out of a sudden, dizzying vertigo. The world was tilting. The script I had followed for 15 years was being rewritten in real time, and I had no lines prepared. Evelyn let out a sharp, incredulous huff. "Oh my God, Daniel," she said, rolling her eyes toward the guests. "You are embarrassing her. Look at her. She is turning red. Stop interrogating my sister." She reached out to touch his arm. A gesture meant to reclaim him, to pull him back into her orbit. Daniel moved his arm. It was a subtle shift, barely an inch, but the rejection was absolute. "I am not interrogating her," Daniel said, his eyes never leaving mine. "I am trying to understand." "Understand what?" Evelyn snapped, her voice rising now, edging toward shrill. "I told you, she works at the courthouse. She files papers. She answers phones. She is an admin. She mocked me in front of everyone. She reduced my entire existence to a punchline to elevate herself. She threw the label out like a shield. She is just admin, daring anyone to challenge the hierarchy she had built." But Daniel did not blink. He looked at me with a terrifying clarity, as if he were seeing the ghost of the woman I was in the courtroom superimposed over the woman sitting at the garden table. "I do not think she is," he said softly. Then he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the white tablecloth, closing the distance between us. "You knew about the Sterling motions," he said. "You knew the docket was sealed. You knew why the dismissal was denied. An admin files the order, Holly. They do not understand the legal reasoning behind it. And that handshake earlier. That wasn't the handshake of someone who takes coffee orders. That was the handshake of someone who decides who goes to prison. The table was deadly silent. My mother had gone pale, her hand clutching her pearl necklace. My father was staring at his wine glass, as if hoping it would spontaneously combust and provide a distraction. Daniel waited a beat, letting his observations land. Then he asked the question that destroyed the peace I had sacrificed everything to keep. So, he asked, his voice low and intense. What do you actually do? The question hung there, exposed and undeniable. Time seemed to warp. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, a roar like the ocean. I looked at Evelyn. She was glaring at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and fury, silently commanding me to fix this. To smooth it over. To tell the lie again so she could go back to being the star. I looked at my parents. They looked terrified. Not for me, but for the scene. They were pleading with their eyes, begging me to be the smaller version of myself, the version that fit neatly into the box they had taped shut years ago. For 1,000 small moments, I had done exactly that. Every Thanksgiving, every birthday, every phone call where I swallowed my pride and let them believe I was less than I was. I had told myself I was protecting them. I had told myself I was being kind. But looking at Daniel's expectant face, and then at Evelyn's sneer, I realized the truth. I had not been protecting them. I had been enabling them. I had been protecting their comfort at the expense of my own reality. By staying silent, I had agreed to be a prop in Evelyn's play. The anger I had suppressed for decades did not explode. It did not flare up hot and messy. It crystallized. It turned into something cold, hard, and incredibly heavy in the center of my chest. It was the weight of the gavel. It was the weight of the truth. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling slightly. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of lilies and roasted meat, and exhaled the fear. I placed my fork down on the plate. Then I placed my hands flat on the table, feeling the cool wood beneath my palms. I realized then that silence does not buy peace. It only rents it. And the rent was due. I straightened my spine. I lifted my chin. The wobbly chair felt steady now, anchored by the gravity of what I was about to do. I looked at Daniel, and for the first time in my life, I did not check to see if Evelyn approved of my answer. I opened my mouth, and the lie died in my throat. Judge. I said it softly. I did not shout it. I did not slam my hand on the table. I simply dropped the word into the center of the dinner plates like a heavy stone into a still pond. Judge, I repeated, ensuring the sound carried clearly to both ends of the table. For a moment, the world did not move. The breeze stopped rustling the ribbons in the trees. The candles flickered in the glass votives, casting long, wavering shadows across the untouched food. It was the kind of silence that usually follows a car crash. The split second where the brain refuses to process the violence it has just witnessed. Then, Evelyn laughed. It was a terrible sound. It was sharp, brittle, and entirely devoid of humor. It was the sound of glass breaking under pressure. Oh my God, she said, shaking her head and looking around the table for support. Very funny. Holly. You have had too much wine. She waved her hand dismissively, a gesture she had used 1,000 times to swat away my opinions, my feelings, my existence. She is joking, everyone, Evelyn announced, her voice pitching too high. She is trying to be funny. It is a joke. I did not look at her. I did not look at my parents, whose faces were drained of color, their mouths hanging open in a grotesque parody of shock. I kept my eyes locked on Daniel. He had not laughed. He had not moved. His face had gone slack, the polite social mask sliding off to reveal something raw and calculating underneath. He was staring at me, not as his fiancée's sister, but as a problem he was frantically trying to solve. His eyes searched my face, dissecting the angle of my jaw, the stillness of my posture, the way I held his gaze without blinking. He was reassembling his memory of me, Stripping away the admin label Evelyn had pasted over my face and seeing the structure underneath. "Judge," he whispered. It was not a question. It was a realization. Then, his eyes widened. A sudden, sharp intake of breath hissed through his teeth. "H.R. Miller," he said. The name landed harder than the title. H.R. were my initials. Holly Rose. It was how I signed my opinions. It was the name on the placard outside my chambers. "Judge H.R. Miller," Daniel said, his voice gaining strength, turning incredulous. "Third Circuit. Civil Division." I nodded once. Slow. Deliberate. "Yes," I said. The color drained from Daniel's face so fast it looked like he might faint. He leaned back in his chair, his hands sliding off the table, as if the linen had suddenly burned him. "I stood in front of you," he said, his voice sounding hollow. "Last year. The Sterling corporate dispute. The intellectual property case with the pharmaceutical merger." "I remember," I said. My voice was calm, the voice of the bench. "You were representing the plaintiff. You wore a Navy suit. You argued that the statute of limitations had been told by the discovery rule." Daniel swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed in his throat. "And you denied my motion to dismiss," he said. "You wrote a 20-page opinion on it. I read it. I memorized it." He looked at me with a mixture of horror and awe. "You were fair," he murmured, almost to himself. "You were incredibly direct. You did not let opposing counsel get away with a single objection that was not grounded in precedent." He turned his head slowly, looking at Evelyn as if he had never seen her before. "You told me she answered phones," he said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the garden like a knife. "You told me she was an admin. You told me she was slow." Evelyn's smile was gone. Her face was a mask of panic, her eyes darting between Daniel and me, trying to find a way to regain control of the narrative that was disintegrating in her hands. "I did not know," she snapped, her voice cracking. "She never told us. She let us believe it." She turned on me, her finger jabbing the air. "This is your fault," she shrieked. "You lied. You sat there for years and let us think you were a nobody." "I did not lie," I said. The volume of my voice did not rise, but the temperature at the table dropped 10 degrees. "I told you I worked at the courthouse. I told you I worked in courtroom 4. You never asked what I did there. You told me what I did. And I stopped correcting you because it was the only way to get you to stop talking about yourself for 5 seconds." My mother made a small, choking sound. My father reached for his water glass, his hand shaking so badly that water sloshed over the rim and stained the white tablecloth. "You are a judge?" my father asked, his voice thick with disbelief. "Since when?" 3 years, I said. "And before that I was a magistrate for 4. And before that, I was a senior clerk." The numbers hung in the air, a timeline of their neglect. 7 years. 7 years of holidays, of dinners, of quick phone calls where they asked if I was still pushing paper, and I had simply said yes to make the conversation end faster. Daniel stood up. He did not do it aggressively. He stood up slowly, as if the air in the room had become too thin to breathe while sitting down. He looked at me, really looked at me, with a profound, terrifying respect. "I apologize, Your Honor," he said. The title sucked the oxygen out of the garden. "Your Honor," he used it instinctively, a reflex born of his profession. He was not speaking to his future sister-in-law anymore. He was speaking to the court. "I had no idea," he said. "If I had known—" He trailed off, looking down at Evelyn, who was staring up at him with her mouth open, looking small, petty, and infinitely exposed. The shift was physical. The gravity of the party had inverted. 5 minutes ago, Evelyn had been the sun, and I had been a speck of dust. Now, I was the anchor, the heaviest thing in the universe. And everyone else was scrambling to find their footing on the tilting deck. I picked up my wine glass. I took a slow sip. The wine was warm, but it tasted sweet. "It is fine, Daniel," I said. "You were arguing a case. I was doing my job." But Evelyn was not done. She could not let the spotlight go, even if it burned her. She pushed her chair back, the legs screeching against the stone, and stood up to face me. Her face was twisted, ugly with jealousy. "Stop it," she yelled. "Stop looking at her like that! She is not special! She is just Holly! She is ruining my engagement party on purpose." She looked around the table, desperate for an ally. "She is jealous," Evelyn cried. "She has always been jealous of me. That is why she did this? To humiliate me?" I set my glass down. I looked at my sister, really looked at her and realized I felt nothing. No fear, no intimidation. Just a dull, aching pity. "I did not ruin your party, Evelyn," I said. "You asked a question. I answered it." And then, the silence returned, heavier than before, because now there was no laughter to break it. There was only the truth. Sitting in the center of the table, waiting to be acknowledged. "That is impossible." My mother spoke the words like a prayer, or perhaps a plea bargain. She was staring at me across the centerpiece of white lilies, her face a mask of frantic confusion. Her hands were gripping the table edge, so hard her knuckles had turned the color of old bone. "You said you worked at the courthouse," she said, her voice trembling, pitching up into a thin, reedy sound that grated against the silence. "You told us explicitly. You said, and I remember this clearly, Holly. You said you were assisting with the docket." "I did," I replied. My voice was steady, a stark contrast to her vibration. "I managed the docket. That is what a judge does." "But you said you were in the back," she insisted, looking around at the guests, as if asking them to witness my treachery. "You said you were in the back office?" "I said I was in chambers, Mother." "You assumed that meant a supply closet." She shook her head, a violent, jerky motion. No, that does not make sense. You would have told us. If you were that, you would have said something. We are your family." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the fear in her eyes. It was not fear of me. It was fear of the narrative collapsing. If I was a judge, then she was a mother who did not know her own daughter. If I was successful, then she was negligent. It was easier for her to believe I was a liar than to admit she had been deaf for 10 years. "I tried," I said softly. "I tried 3 years ago at Thanksgiving, when I was sworn in. I brought the program from the ceremony. I put it on the coffee table." Evelyn put her wine glass on it to keep a ring off the wood. My mother flinched as if I had slapped her. "I tried last Christmas," I continued, my voice remaining calm. "Relentless. When I told you I had a high-profile case that was keeping me up at night. You told me to make sure I did not mix up the filing cabinets again." "That is different," Evelyn shouted. She slammed her hand on the table, causing the silverware to jump. "You are twisting things. You always do this. You make yourself the victim. You let us believe you were nothing, because it made you feel superior." She was standing now, leaning over the table. Her face flushed a blotchy, ugly red. The beautiful, poised bride was gone. In her place was the playground bully who had just realized her victim had grown taller than her. "You wanted to embarrass me," Evelyn hissed. "You waited for tonight. You waited until my friends were here, until Daniel's partners were here. You planned this. You wanted to ruin my moment, because you cannot stand that I am happy." I picked up my napkin and folded it. I placed it neatly next to my plate. "I did not plan anything, Evelyn. You asked me a question." Daniel spoke then. His voice was low, but it commanded the attention of the entire garden. "She is right, Evelyn." Evelyn whipped her head around to look at him. Her eyes were wide, betraying a sense of betrayal that would have been comical if it were not so pathetic. "Whose side are you on?" she demanded. Daniel did not look at her. He was still looking at me, shaking his head slowly, as if trying to reconcile two different realities. "I am on the side of the facts," he said. "And the fact is, your sister is not just a judge. She is the Scalpel." The nickname hung in the air. A few of the lawyers at the other end of the table stirred. They knew the name. I saw the recognition dawn on their faces, the sudden straightening of spines. The scalpel, my father asked, his voice weak. What does that mean? It means she cuts through the nonsense, Daniel said, finally turning to look at my father. It means she is precise. It means she does not tolerate grandstanding or wasted time. He looked back at me, a strange mix of admiration and regret in his eyes. I heard stories about Judge Miller, he said. Everyone in the circuit has. They say she runs the tightest courtroom in the state. They say she stripped a senior partner at Davis and Lowery of his pro-hack vice status because he tried to bury evidence in a document dump. He laughed, a short, disbelief-filled sound. I was terrified of you, he admitted. When I walked into that courtroom last year, I spent 3 nights preparing my opening statement because I heard you ate unprepared lawyers for breakfast. He paused, then added quietly. And then I came to dinner at your parents' house, and Evelyn told me her sister was a little slow. That she needed help with her taxes. The shame in the room was palpable. It radiated off my parents in waves. My father picked up his wine glass and drained it in one swallow. My mother was staring at the tablecloth, tracing a pattern on the lace, refusing to lift her head. But Evelyn was not capable of shame. Not yet. She only felt the loss of control. And she fought to get it back the only way she knew how. By attacking. So you are famous, she spat, her voice dripping with venom. Who cares? Does that give you the right to make me look like an idiot in front of my fiancé? You made yourself look like an idiot, Evelyn, I said. The words left my mouth before I could filter them. They were not polite. They were not the words of the quiet sister. They were the words of the judge. Excuse me. Evelyn sputtered. I turned my chair slightly so I was facing her fully. I clasped my hands in front of me on the table. It was the posture I used when I was about to deliver a sentencing. You stood up in front of 30 people. I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the garden. You took a microphone, and you mocked me. You told a room full of strangers that I was incompetent. You laughed at my job. You laughed at my life. I leaned forward. Not me. I sat here and took it. I let you have your fun. I let you have your laugh. But then Daniel asked me a direct question. And unlike you, I do not lie to make myself feel better. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. The guests were frozen. No one was eating. No one was drinking. They were witnessing a dissection, and they could not look away. Evelyn opened her mouth to retort, but nothing came out. She looked at Daniel, desperate for him to defend her, to tell me to shut up, to put me back in my box. But Daniel was not looking at her. He was looking at his hands, his brow furrowed in deep, painful thought. You knew, Evelyn whispered. Her voice broke. You knew who she was, Daniel. You just said you knew her reputation. I knew Judge Miller, Daniel said. His voice flat. I did not know Judge Miller was Holly. Because you never mentioned her last name. He looked up at Evelyn then, and the expression on his face was one of absolute coldness. You never let her speak. Evelyn, every time we had dinner, every time we visited. You talked over her. You answered for her. You told me she was shy. You told me she had anxiety. He shook his head. I never questioned it, he said. I trusted you. Thought you were protecting her. He looked at me. I see now that you were hiding her. That was the blow that broke the dam. Evelyn gasped, a wet, ragged sound. Tears welled up in her eyes, but they were tears of rage, not sorrow. I was not hiding her, she screamed. She is my sister. I love her. I wanted tonight to be perfect. She looked at our parents. Mad! Tell him. Tell him how much I do for her. My mother looked up. Her eyes were red, her face crumpled. She looked from Evelyn, shaking with fury, to me, sitting calm and immovable. For the first time in my life, I saw her hesitate. She looked at the woman in the white dress. The golden child, the star she had polished for 30 years. And then she looked at me, the stranger at the end of the table, who commanded the respect of the man Evelyn was trying to marry. Evelyn, my mother said softly. Please, sit down. You are making a scene. Evelyn recoiled as if she had been shot. I am making a scene, she screeched. She lied to us for a decade. She made us think she was a failure. I did not make you think anything, I said. I simply did not stop you from believing what you wanted to believe. I stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate. I smoothed the front of my dress. It was a simple navy sheath, off the rack, nothing like the couture gown Evelyn was wearing. But in that moment, I felt like I was wearing my robes. I felt the weight of the authority I had earned, not inherited. I think I should go, I said. No, Evelyn shouted. She lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the table. You do not get to walk away. You do not get to drop a bomb like this and just leave. You ruined everything. You always ruin everything. She grabbed a wine glass. My wine glass. And hurled it. It was a clumsy throw, fueled by blind temper. The glass did not hit me. It shattered against the stone. Patio a few feet to my left, spraying red wine across the hem of the white tablecloth, and the polished shoes of the guest next to me. The sound of the shattering glass was the final gavel strike. A woman screamed. My father jumped up, knocking his chair over. Evelyn, he shouted. Enough. Evelyn stood there, her chest heaving, her hand still outstretched. She looked at the broken glass, then at Daniel. Daniel had not moved. He was staring at the red stain spreading on the white linen. It looked like a wound. I am sorry, Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a whisper. I am so upset. She pushed me. Daniel stood up slowly. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had walked into a room, expecting a celebration, and found a crime scene. She did not say a word. Evelyn, Daniel said. She just stood up. He looked at me. I will walk you to your car, Judge. The title again. It was a shield, a wall he was building between me and his fiancé. Evelyn made a noise in the back of her throat, a strangled protest. Daniel, no. You stay here. This is our party, is it? Daniel asked. He looked around the silent garden, at the shocked guests, at the broken glass. It does not feel like a party anymore. He walked around the table. He did not touch Evelyn. He did not even look at her as he passed. He came to my side, offering his arm not as a romantic gesture, but as a professional courtesy. Shall we? He asked. I looked at Evelyn one last time. She was small. She was vibrating with a tantrum she could no longer control. And for the first time, I realized that her begness had always been an illusion. She was a balloon, full of hot air and fragile ego. And I had been the one holding the string, keeping her tethered to the ground. I had just let go. I took Daniel's arm. Yes, I said. Let's go. We walked across the manicured lawn. The grass soft and yielding beneath my heels. The silence from the dinner table did not last long. Before we reached the edge of the patio, the sound of chair legs scraping against stone erupted behind us, followed by the rapid, frantic clickings on the pavers. Daniel. Evelyn's voice was a tear in the fabric of the night. It was high, desperate, and laced with a panic that I had never heard from her before. She was not commanding a room anymore. She was begging for the audience not to leave. We stopped. Daniel turned slowly, his movement heavy with exhaustion. I turned with him, not because I owed her anything, but because I knew this scene needed an ending. Evelyn skidded to a halt 3 feet away from us. Her chest was heaving. Her perfect hair was coming loose from its pins, strands falling across her face in chaotic scribbles. She did not look at me. She looked only at him, reaching out a hand that trembled in the cool night air. Where are you going? She asked, her voice cracking. You cannot just leave. We have not even cut the cake. The photographer is waiting for the sunset shots. Daniel looked at her hand, hovering in the space between them, and then he looked at her face. His expression was not angry. It was something far worse. It was disappointed. I think we are done with pictures, Evelyn, he said. What are you talking about? She cried, taking a step forward. Her eyes darted to the guests still seated at the table, watching us like a jury. You are overreacting. She upset you. I get it. She upset me too. But you cannot walk out on our engagement party. Think about how that looks. That was it. Even now, with her world fracturing, her primary concern was the optics. How it looked. Not how it felt. Not the damage she had done to her sister or the lie she had fed her fiancé. She was worried about the Instagram caption. It looks like the truth, Daniel said calmly. And I think that is what we are missing here. Evelyn flinched. She turned to me then, her eyes narrowing into slits of pure, distilled venom. Fix this, she hissed. Tell him. Tell him you were just being dramatic. Tell him you are sorry for ruining the night. I looked at my sister. I saw the fear behind the anger. She was terrified of the silence. She was terrified of a world where she was not the protagonist, where the spotlight might drift to someone else, revealing the cracks in her performance. I am not sorry, Evelyn, I said. The words felt strange on my tongue. For 30 years, I had apologized for taking up space. I had apologized for breathing too loud, for scoring too high, for existing in a way that inconvenienced her ego. I'm not sorry, I repeated, louder this time. I am done apologizing for being who I am.
Holly!
The voice came from the patio. My parents were rushing toward us. A two-headed hydra of anxiety. My mother was wringing her hands, her face pale under the string lights. My father looked red and blustery. Trying to summon an authority, he had lost the moment Daniel called me Your Honor. Holly, wait, my mother gasped, reaching us. She stopped, looking between Daniel and me, her eyes wide and pleading. You cannot leave like this, she said. The guests, everyone is wondering what is happening. Let them wonder, I said. My father stepped in, puffing out his chest. Now hold on. Let's all just take a breath. We are a family. We settle things at the table. He looked at Daniel, forcing a jovial man-to-man smile that looked like a rictus of pain. Daniel, son, you know how sisters are, he said, letting out a forced chuckle. A little rivalry. A little drama. It is all in good fun. Holly has always had a bit of a flair for the unexpected. Daniel stared at him. He did not smile back. This is not a rivalry, Daniel said coldly. This is bullying. And you watched it happen. My father's smile faltered. He blinked, looking down at his shoes. We did not know, my mother interjected quickly, grabbing my arm. Her grip was tight, desperate. Holly, we did not know. You have to believe us. If we had known you were a judge.
My God, a judge!
Why didn't you tell us? She looked at me with a sudden, hungry intensity. I could see the gears turning in her mind. She was rewriting the script in real time. She was already imagining how she would spin this to her friends. I'm my daughter, the judge. We are so proud. We kept it quiet to protect her privacy. She was looking for a way to opt my success, to make it hers. We would have been so proud, she said, her voice trembling with performative emotion. We could have celebrated you. I looked down at her hand on my arm. It felt like a claw. I pulled my arm away. You did not want to know, Mom, I said. She recoiled, clutching her chest. That is not true. How can you say that? I said it because it is true, I replied. My voice was steady, calm. The voice of a woman delivering a verdict. I told you I worked at the courthouse. You heard clerk. I told you I was busy. You heard struggling. You never asked a follow-up question. Not once in 10 years. I looked at my father. You were not interested in who I was, I said. You were only interested in how I fit into the picture you painted for Evelyn. I was the shadow so she could be the light. And if I told you the truth, if I told you I was successful, it would have ruined the composition. My father opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at Evelyn. Who was standing with her arms crossed, staring at the ground, refusing to meet anyone's eye. You are embarrassed, I said, looking back at my mother. You are not hurt because I lied. You are hurt because you realized you have been treating a superior court judge like a servant. and now the neighbors know. My mother burst into tears. It was a loud, sobbing release, designed to garner sympathy, to turn the tables so she could be the victim of my cruelty. "How can you be so cold?" she sobbed. "We raised you. We gave you everything. You gave me a roof," I said, "and you gave me a role. But I resigned from that role tonight." I turned away from them. I felt a lightness in my chest, a physical sensation of weight lifting off my shoulders. It was the weight of their expectations, the heavy, suffocating blanket of their indifference. I had carried it for so long I had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. I looked at Daniel. "I am going to my car," I said. "I will walk with you," he replied. "Daniel?" Evelyn screamed again. "If you walk away with her, do not bother coming back?" It was an ultimatum. The final card in her deck. She played it with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. She assumed the threat of losing her was enough to bring anyone to their knees. Daniel stopped. He turned to look at her one last time. The distance between them was only a few yards, but it felt like miles. He looked at the diamond on her finger, the dress, the banner with their names snapping in the wind. "I think," Daniel said slowly, "that is for the best." Evelyn gasped. The sound was sucked out of the air. She stood frozen, her mouth open, her eyes wide with shock. She had overplayed her hand, and for the first time in her life, the house had won. Daniel turned his back on her. We walked away. We walked past the white lilies that smelled too sweet. We walked past the string lights that buzzed with artificial cheer. We walked off the patio and onto the gravel driveway, the crunch of stones under our feet the only sound in the night. The air out here was different. It smelled of pine and damp earth, clean and sharp. Behind us, the party was dead. There was no music, no laughter, just the silent, stunned wreckage of a family that had broken itself against the truth. We reached my car. A sensible sedan parked in the shadows at the end of the driveway, far away from the luxury vehicles near the entrance. I unlocked the door. "Thank you," Daniel said. I looked him over the roof of the car. He looked exhausted, stripped raw, but his eyes were clear. "For what?" I asked. "For waking me up," he said. He shoved his hands into his pockets, looking back toward the house where Evelyn was likely still standing, frozen in her disbelief. I knew something was off, he admitted. For months. Small things. The way she talked about people. The way she needed constant validation. But I ignored it. It is easy to ignore things when the package is pretty. He looked back at me, but watching her tonight, watching how she treated you all, I could not ignore that. "You defended me," I said. "You did not have to do that." "Yes," he said firmly. "I did. Because if I had stayed silent, I would have been just like them." He reached out a hand. I took it. It was a firm grip, warm and respectful. "I am sorry about the engagement," I said. He let out a short, dry laugh. "Do not be," he said. "You saved me a divorce." I smiled. It was a small, tired smile, but it was real. "Good night, Daniel." "Good night, Judge." I got into the car. I closed the door, shutting out the night, the gravel, and the house. I sat there for a moment in the silence of the cabin. My hands were gripping the steering wheel, but they were not shaking. I looked in the rearview mirror. I could see the glow of the party lights in the distance, a small, blurry island of artificial warmth. I saw the silhouette of my mother standing on the patio, looking into the dark. I started the engine. I put the car in reverse. I backed out of the driveway, the tires crunching softly. I shifted into drive. I did not look back. I drove down the winding road, away from the house, away from the lies, away from the girl they wanted me to be. The road ahead was dark, illuminated only by my headlights, cutting a path through the night. I turned on the radio. Soft jazz filled the car. I rolled down the window, letting the cool wind rush in, tangling my hair. I took a deep breath. I was Holly. I was a judge. And for the first time in my life, I was free. I woke up at 7:30 the next morning. The sunlight was streaming through the blinds, cutting lines of dust and gold across the hardwood floor. It was quiet. Not the heavy, loaded silence of the dinner table, but a clean, empty silence. The kind you find after a storm has passed and scrubbed the sky clean. I lay there for a moment, listening to the city outside. A siren wailed in the distance. A bus hissed its brakes. It was Sunday. The world was continuing, indifferent to the implosion of my family dynamic. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a barrage of notifications. 14 missed calls from my mother. 6 from my father. A string of text messages from Evelyn that started with accusations and ended with a sprawling, chaotic plea for me to fix what I had broken. I scrolled through them. Reading the words detachedly. Call us immediately. We are worried about you. You are being selfish. Daniel is not answering his phone. What did you say to him? Please. Holly. We can talk about this. I felt a ghost of the old guilt, the reflex to smooth things over, to pick up the phone and apologize just to make the notifications stop. But then I remembered the way my mother had looked at the broken wine glass instead of me. I remembered Evelyn's voice, sharp and entitled, demanding I shrink so she could expand. I pressed the side button on the phone, silencing it. I did not delete the messages. I simply archived the thread. I put the phone face down on the table and got out of bed. Around 10 o'clock, there was a knock at my door. I knew who it was before I opened it. Daniel stood in the hallway. He looked like he had not slept. His shirt was rumpled, and he had the shadow of stubble on his jaw. A stark contrast to the polished corporate lawyer I had seen the night before. He held 2 coffees in a cardboard carrier. Peace offering? He asked, his voice rough. I stepped back to let him in. We sat on the couch, the steam from the cups rising between us. He did not look at the apartment. My books, my framed degree, the quiet order of my life. He stared into his coffee. It is over, he said. I did not ask if he meant the engagement or the argument. I knew he meant all of it. She came to my hotel this morning, he continued. She did not ask how I was. She asked if I had called the caterers to get a refund on the deposit. He let out a short, humorless laugh. She was worried about the money, Holly. She just lost the person she was supposed to spend her life with, and she was worried about the deposit on the chocolate fountain. I took a sip of my coffee. It was bitter, just the way I liked it. I am sorry, Daniel, I said. I know you loved her. I loved who I thought she was, he corrected, and I think I loved the idea of us. The power couple. The image. He looked at me then. Thank you for being honest, he said. It cost you a lot to say that word at the table. I know that now. It cost me nothing I wanted to keep, I replied. He nodded, standing up. He placed the untouched coffee on the table. I will see you around, Judge, he said. You will see me in court, Counselor, I said. Try to have your motions filed on time. He smiled. It was a genuine smile this time, reaching his eyes. He walked out the door, and as the latch clicked shut, I felt the final tether snap. The play was over. The actors had gone home. On Monday morning, I showered and dressed. I chose a charcoal suit, crisp and tailored. I drove to the courthouse, navigating the familiar streets of the city center. When I walked through the metal detectors at the entrance, the guard, a man named Frank who had worked there for 20 years, nodded at me. Good morning, Your Honor, he said. Good morning, Frank, I replied. I took the elevator to the 4th floor. The hallway smelled of floor wax and old paper, a scent that had always grounded me. I walked past the clerk's office. I could hear the phones ringing, the hum of the copier, the low murmur of people doing the work that kept the world spinning. I entered my chambers. My clerk, a bright young woman named Sarah, looked up from her desk. Morning, Judge, she said. The docket is full today. We have the arraignments at 9, and the motions hearing on the construction suit at 1. Excellent, I said. Let's get started. I walked into my office and closed the door. I went to the closet and took out my robe. It was heavy black silk, cool to the touch. I slipped my arms into the sleeves. I zipped it up. It settled onto my shoulders, a familiar, comforting weight. This was not a costume. It was not a disguise. It was the truth. It was the armor I had built for myself, stitch by stitch, case by case. Long night by long night? I looked in the mirror. I did not see the invisible sister. I did not see the admin. I did not see the disappointment. I saw the law. I opened the door to the courtroom. The bailiff, a towering man with a voice like thunder, saw me coming. He stood up straight. "All rise!" he bellowed. The noise of the courtroom died instantly. The lawyers stopped shuffling their papers. The gallery went silent. Everyone stood up. They looked at me, waiting. I walked up the steps to the bench. I looked out over the room, at the faces of the people seeking justice, seeking answers, seeking truth. I sat down in the high, backed leather chair. I arranged my files. I looked at the first attorney, who was watching me with nervous anticipation. I picked up my gavel. "Be seated," I said. And the court was in session.